$3 million. That was the price tag Caleb Montgomery put on a human heart. It wasn't a business merger, and it wasn't a real estate deal in the Hamptons. It was a wager scribbled on a cocktail napkin at the Sapphire Club in Manhattan. The challenge? Find the most invisible, pathetic woman in New York City, make her fall in love, put a ring on her finger, and then dump her publicly 1 month later. But Caleb made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't realize that the nobody he targeted was playing a much darker, more expensive game than he ever could. This is the story of how a cruel joke turned into the greatest financial ambush in Wall Street history. The date was October 14th, 2023. The location was the VIP section of Obsidian, a members-only lounge where the entry fee costs more than the average American's annual salary. Sitting at the center table was Caleb Montgomery. If you follow the tabloids, you know the name. The heir to the Montgomery shipping fortune, a man with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a reputation for leaving models in tears. Caleb was bored. He had money, access, and power, but he lacked amusement. Surrounding him were his usual suspects: Tristan Waldorf, the son of a media tycoon, and Pierce O'Connell, a hedge fund manager with zero moral compass. They were drunk on 1,942, Don Julio, and their own egos. "You've lost your touch, Cal," Tristan sneered, swirling his glass. "You only date women who are paid to be seen with you. I bet you couldn't land a regular civilian, a nobody, someone who shops at Walmart and clips coupons." Caleb laughed, leaning back in the velvet booth. "I can charm anyone, Tristan. Rich, poor, it doesn't matter. It's all biology and bank accounts." "Prove it," Pierce interjected, slamming a hand on the table. "The annual Montgomery Gala is in 3 months. I bet you $3 million you can't find a total scrub, a woman with zero social standing, zero money, and zero fashion sense. Marry her and bring her to the gala as your wife. Then, right after the toast, you announce the divorce." Caleb's eyes glinted. It was cruel. It was sociopathic. It was perfect. 3 million? Make it 5. And I'll pick the girl tonight. They scanned the room, but everyone in Obsidian was polished. Caleb stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the street. It was raining. Below, struggling with a broken umbrella and dropping a stack of wet files into a puddle, was a young woman. She was wearing a shapeless gray raincoat and worn-out sneakers. She looked exhausted, defeated, and completely invisible. "Her," Caleb pointed. "The drowned rat on 52nd Street. Her name, they would soon find out, was Sienna Cole. She worked as an archive assistant at a dusty municipal library in Queens. She lived in a 4th-floor walk-up with faulty heating. She was the perfect victim." Caleb initiated Operation Prince Charming the very next day. He staged a chance meeting at the coffee shop near her library. He spilled her coffee, apologized profusely, and offered to replace it. When Sienna looked up, her glasses were fogged, and her hair was frizzy from the humidity. She looked at Caleb wearing a $5,000 Tom Ford suit with skepticism. "I don't need your charity," she mumbled, trying to walk past him. "It's not charity, it's an apology." Caleb smiled, flashing the grin that had graced the cover of GQ. "I'm Caleb. Let me make it up to you. Dinner? Tonight?" Sienna hesitated. A long, painful pause. Then she adjusted her glasses, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Fine, but I pick the place." Caleb texted Tristan, under the table, "The mouse has taken the cheese." He had no idea that the mouse was actually a viper, lying in wait. The courtship was a whirlwind, engineered for maximum emotional manipulation. Caleb didn't just date Sienna, he love-bombed her. He didn't take her to Paris or Milan. That would be too intimidating for a poor girl. Instead, he played the role of the humble billionaire, tired of the fake society life. He took her to Coney Island for hot dogs. He walked her home to her crumbling apartment in Queens and accidentally left his cashmere scarf there. He listened to her talk about her boring job, organizing old census records. He played the part of the lonely soul, seeking connection perfectly. "I've never met anyone like you, Sienna," Caleb whispered one night in November, sitting on her fire escape. "You're real. Everyone else, they just want my name. You see me." Sienna looked down at her hands. She was quiet, unassuming. "I just see a man who seems sad," she said softly. To Caleb's friends, she was a joke. Tristan and Pierce called her the Dowdy Duchess in their group chat. They mocked her off-brand purses and the way she didn't know which fork to use at dinner. Caleb laughed along with them behind her back, but to her face, he was the perfect gentleman. By December, the trap was set. Caleb needed to seal the deal before the gala in January. He proposed on Christmas Eve, not with a massive spectacle, but in her tiny living room, amidst the peeling wallpaper. He presented her with a ring, a modest diamond, not too flashy, so she wouldn't suspect he was buying her. "Marry me, Sienna," he said, forcing a tear to his eye. "I don't want a big wedding. I don't want the press. I just want us. Let's elope. Tomorrow." Sienna stared at the ring. The silence in the room was heavy. For a second, Caleb panicked. Did she know? Was she going to say no? Then, a small, unreadable smile touched her lips. "Okay, Caleb, let's do it." They married at City Hall on December 26th. No prenup. Caleb insisted on no prenup to prove his love. But in reality, his lawyers had drafted a secret separation agreement he planned to force her to sign the night of the gala. He thought he was being clever. He thought she had no assets to protect, so a prenup didn't matter for her. The Wolfpack celebrated the marriage with a private party at Tristan's penthouse. Sienna wasn't invited. "I can't believe she actually bought it," Pierce laughed, clinking his glass against Caleb's. "She actually thinks she's Mrs. Montgomery." "She is Mrs. Montgomery," Caleb smirked, checking his phone, "for exactly 3 more weeks. Then, I drop the bomb at the gala, humiliate her, collect my $5 million from you idiots, and file for an annulment based on fraud." "What fraud?" Tristan asked. "I'll invent something. Maybe I'll say she lied about her past." Caleb shrugged. He didn't know how prophetic those words were. 2 days before the gala, the atmosphere in the Montgomery penthouse changed. Caleb came home to find Sienna sitting in his study. She wasn't wearing her usual oversized sweaters or gray slacks. She was wearing a silk robe that looked suspiciously like vintage Chanel. Her hair was blown out, sleek and shiny. The glasses were gone. "Sienna?" Caleb asked, loosening his tie. "What are you doing in here?" She spun the chair around. On the desk in front of her wasn't a library book. It was a dossier, a thick stack of papers with the logo of Blackwood and Associates, the most feared private investigation firm in New York. "Hello, husband," she said. Her voice was different. The stutter was gone. The timidity had evaporated. She sounded cold, precise, and terrifyingly educated. "I was just looking over your portfolio," she said, tapping a red fingernail on the desk. "You're over-leveraged in tech, Caleb. And your offshore accounts in the Caymans? A bit sloppy." Caleb laughed nervously. "What are you talking about? Did you hit your head?" Sienna stood up. She walked toward him, and for the first time, Caleb realized she was tall. She had been slouching for 3 months. "The bet?" she said simply. Caleb froze. $5 million against Tristan and Pierce, she recited, her eyes boring into his. "To marry the most pathetic woman you could find, and dump her at the gala. Did I get the terms right?" Caleb's face drained of color. "How? Who told you?" "Nobody told me, Caleb. I recorded you. That night at Obsidian, the drowned rat outside the window. I wasn't there by accident. I was waiting for you to look." She took a step closer, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. "You wanted to marry a nobody. Instead, you just married the sole heiress to the Kensington Rothschild fortune." Caleb gasped. "Kensington? As in Arthur Kensington? The steel magnate?" "My grandfather," Sienna smiled, and it was a smile full of teeth. "And you just married me without a prenup. Which means, Caleb, half of everything you own is now mine, and I intend to take it all." The air in the study was so thick with tension, it felt like ozone before a lightning strike. Caleb Montgomery, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions while hungover, was currently trembling. He stared at the woman he thought he knew, The woman who cried over a dead pigeon last week and saw a predator. You're lying, Caleb stammered, his voice cracking. Sienna Kensington lives in London. She's a recluse. No one has seen her face in 10 years. Sienna stood up and walked to the vintage globe in the corner of the room. She spun it casually, with one manicured finger. That's the beauty of being truly wealthy, Caleb. You can buy privacy. I haven't been hiding. I've just been selective. And for the last 6 months, I've been selected to be Sienna Cole, the invisible nobody from Queens. She reached into her silk robe and pulled out a slim, silver flash drive. She tossed it onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy clack next to the dossier. What is this? Caleb asked, eyeing it like it was a grenade. That, Sienna said, pouring herself a glass of Caleb's finest scotch without asking, is a backup of your phone, and Tristan's, and Pierce's. Caleb lunged for his phone, but Sienna laughed a cold, sharp sound. Oh, don't bother. My team cloned them weeks ago. While you were sleeping at my apartment, I had a lovely digital forensics expert named Roberts access your cloud. We have the group chat, Caleb, the Wolfpack thread. We have every derogatory comment, every illegal stock tip, and, of course, the terms of the bet. Caleb sank into his leather chair. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Why? He whispered. If you're a Kensington, you have billions. Why waste your time on me? Why play this sick game? Sienna's expression darkened. The playful cruelty vanished, replaced by a deep, simmering rage. Do you remember the chaotic acquisition of Helix Dynamics 4 years ago? Your father, Lawrence Montgomery, executed a hostile takeover. He stripped the assets, fired 3,000 employees, and liquidated the pension fund. That's business. Caleb shrugged weakly. That was my uncle's company, Sienna snapped. The stress caused his stroke. He died 3 months later. I was the executor of his estate. I saw the emails, Caleb. I saw how your family laughed about gutting the fish. I promised myself that day that I wouldn't just beat the Montgomerys. I would own them. She took a sip of the scotch, savoring the burn. I knew you were the weak link, she continued. Lawrence is too paranoid. But you're arrogant. You're desperate for approval. And you have a gambling problem. I knew if I positioned myself as the perfect victim, you couldn't resist. Caleb's mind was racing. He needed an exit strategy. He needed his lawyer. He reached for the landline. Go ahead, Sienna gestured with her glass. Call Leonard. Ask him what happens when you marry a woman without a prenup in New York State, commingle your assets for a month, and then she files for divorce, citing cruel and inhuman treatment, backed by audio evidence of a conspiracy to defraud. Caleb dialed. His hands were shaking so badly, he misdialed twice. When he finally got Leonard on the line, Leonard Ross, the most expensive divorce attorney in Manhattan, the conversation was short. Leonard, I have a situation, Caleb hissed. I married a woman, no prenup. She's actually Sienna Kensington. She has recordings of the bet. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, Leonard's voice came through, sounding tired. Caleb, are you telling me you married the granddaughter of Arthur Kensington, a man who uses senators as footstools without a contract, as part of a documented harassment campaign? Yes, Caleb breathed. Half, Leonard said. She gets half. Minimum. If she goes to the press with the tapes, the stock price of Montgomery shipping tanks, the board will oust your father. You'll be pariahs. Settle. Give her whatever she wants. Caleb hung up. He looked at Sienna, who was now checking her nails. What do you want? Caleb asked, defeated. I want to go to the gala, Sienna smiled. I want to finish the game. You were going to announce our divorce, remember? I think we should stick to the plan. But the narrative, that's going to change. The next 24 hours were a blur of psychological warfare. Caleb tried to warn Tristan and Pierce, but Sienna had anticipated this. She confiscated his devices. She had private security guards, massive men in dark suits, who made Caleb's bodyguards look like mall cops stationed at the penthouse door. For your protection, she claimed, the press is going to be wild. Caleb was a prisoner in his own home. Meanwhile, Sienna, or rather, The woman who was now fully inhabiting the persona of the heiress transformed the penthouse. Gone were the cheap clothes. Stylists arrived with racks of couture. Jewelers arrived with cases of diamonds that required armed escorts. On the morning of the gala, Caleb found Sienna in the living room. She was on a video call with a board of directors. "Yes," she was saying, into her headset, her voice commanding, "I want to increase the stake in Montgomery Shipping to 15% by market close. Use shell companies. Don't let Lawrence see it coming until the SEC filing hits his desk on Monday." Caleb felt bile rise in his throat. She wasn't just taking his money. She was buying his father's company out from under him, using his own distractedness as cover. "You're a monster," Caleb said when she hung up. "I'm a wife," she corrected, standing up. "And tonight is our big night. Go put on your tuxedo, darling. And remember, if you try to run, or if you try to warn your idiot friends, I release the audio of you mocking the SEC chairman's daughter. Remember that conversation?" Caleb paled. He remembered. "Good." Sienna patted his cheek. "Now, look sharp. We have a show to put on." The annual Montgomery Gala was the apex of the New York social calendar. Held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically in the Temple of Dendur, it was a sea of black ties, billion-dollar trust funds, and fake smiles. The press line was 6 deep. Flashbulbs popped like strobes as limousines deposited the city's elite. Caleb stepped out of the limo first. He looked pale, sweating slightly despite the freezing January air. He turned to offer his hand to his wife. The crowd went silent. For months, the tabloids had only seen grainy photos of Caleb's mystery nobody, a frumpy woman in gray coats. They were expecting a train wreck. They were expecting a joke. Instead, a vision emerged. Sienna was wearing a custom-made crimson gown by Alexander McQueen that fit her like a second skin. It was backless, daring, and screamed power. Around her neck was the Kensington Star, a yellow diamond necklace rumor said was lost in the 90s, worth an estimated $40 million. Her hair was a sleek, dark river down her back. Her makeup was sharp enough to cut. She didn't look like a librarian from Queens. She looked like royalty. "Who is that?" a photographer shouted. "Is that the wife?" Sienna smiled, for the cameras, a dazzling, practiced smile, and gripped Caleb's arm. Her grip was iron. "Smile, husband," she whispered through her teeth. "You look like you're going to a funeral." "I am," he muttered. They entered the Temple of Dendur. The room was buzzing. Tristan Waldorf and Pierce O'Connell were waiting near the bar, looking smug. They saw Caleb and waved him over. When they saw Sienna, their jaws literally dropped. "Caleb?" Tristan asked, eyeing Sienna up and down with confusion and sudden lust. Who? Who is this?" "Hello, Tristan," Sienna answered, before Caleb could speak. Her voice was smooth, cultured, devoid of the Queen's accent she had faked for months. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Sienna." Pierce choked on his martini. The librarian? "I've been promoted," she said dryly. "Caleb, get me a drink. Champagne. Vintage." Caleb obeyed like a whipped dog. Tristan and Pierce exchanged horrified glances. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to be wearing a polyester dress and embarrassing him. Instead, she was the most stunning woman in the room. "What did you do, Cal?" Pierce hissed when Caleb returned. "She looks expensive." "Shut up," Caleb whispered, his eyes darting around. "Just shut up. The bet is off." "Off?" Tristan laughed. "No way. It's 9 p.m. The toast is in 30 minutes. You dump her, or you owe us $5 million. "I can't," Caleb pleaded. "You don't understand." "I understand you're chicken," Pierce sneered. The lights dimmed. It was time for the speeches. Lawrence Montgomery, Caleb's father, took the stage. He was a formidable man, completely unaware that his company was currently being raided on the stock market. "Welcome, everyone," Lawrence boomed. "Tonight is about legacy. And speaking of legacy, I'd like to invite my son, Caleb, and his new bride to the stage. Let's welcome them properly." The applause was polite, but curious. Caleb looked like he might vomit. Sienna squeezed his hand. "Let's go, darling." They walked up the stairs to the stage. The microphone stood waiting. This was the moment Caleb had bragged about. The moment he would take the mic, say something cruel like, "It was a mistake," and leave her crying on stage. Caleb stood at the podium, staring out at 500 of the most powerful people in the world. He looked at Tristan and Pierce in the front row, who were snickering. He looked at his father, who looked impatient. Then he looked at Sienna. She was calm, terrifyingly calm. Caleb started, his voice shaking. "I want to thank you all for coming, Sienna and I." He froze. He couldn't do it. Not because he was good, but because he was afraid. Sienna gently reached over and took the microphone from his hand. "What my husband is trying to say," Sienna said, her voice projecting clearly through the hall, "is that honesty is the foundation of any marriage." The room went quiet. The tone was off. It wasn't a thank you speech. "When Caleb met me," Sienna continued, locking eyes with the camera crew broadcasting live, "he made a wager. A bet, specifically, with Mr. Tristan Waldorf and Mr. Pierce O'Connell." She pointed to them. The spotlight swung to the two men, who suddenly looked like deer in headlights. "The bet was for $5 million, Sienna said, her voice steady. "The challenge? To find a woman with zero social standing, deceive her into marriage, and then publicly divorce her at this very gala to humiliate her." Gasps rippled through the room. Lawrence Montgomery stepped forward, looking furious. "Cut the mic," he yelled at the sound technician. "I wouldn't do that," Sienna said, her voice dropping an octave. "Because if you cut the mic, my lawyers release the rest of the tapes to the Department of Justice." Lawrence froze. "You see," Sienna paced the stage. "Caleb thought he picked a nobody. He thought he picked a victim. But he didn't check the background. My name is not Sienna Cole." She paused for effect. The silence was absolute. "My name is Sienna Kensington, and as of this morning, through the lack of a prenuptial agreement and the acquisition of marital assets," she turned to look at Lawrence, "I am the majority shareholder of Montgomery Shipping. Chaos. Absolute chaos." Waiters dropped trays. People stood up. Flashbulbs went supernova. Sienna turned to Caleb, who was crying silently. "Caleb," she said, her voice almost gentle, amplified for the world to hear. "You wanted a show? You wanted a public ending?" She pulled the modest diamond ring off her finger, the one he had bought to mock her poverty, and dropped it. It bounced on the stage floor with a tiny, insignificant sound. "You lose," she whispered. Then, she turned and walked off the stage. Security didn't stop her. They wouldn't dare. She walked straight past a stunned Tristan and Pierce. She stopped for a brief second, leaning down to whisper in Pierce's ear. "Check your email, Pierce. The SEC just sent you a subpoena regarding your insider trading scheme on the Vertex deal. I forwarded them your group chat." Pierce turned white. Sienna Kensington walked out of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and into the flashing lights of the paparazzi, alone, victorious, and terrifying. But the war wasn't over. The Montgomerys were down, but rich men don't die easy. And Caleb had just been humiliated on a global scale. The love or the obsession was about to turn into something much darker. The morning after the gala, New York City woke up to a new reality. The tabloids didn't just run the story, they detonated it. The New York Post cover featured a full-page photo of Sienna standing on the stage of the Temple of Dendur, the Kensington Star diamonds blazing around her neck, pointing an accusatory finger at the Montgomery heir. The headline? The Cinderella Assassin. Wall Street, however, didn't care about the drama. They cared about stability. And Montgomery Shipping, NYSE, M-Ship, was anything but stable. By the time the opening bell rang at 9:30 a.m., the stock had plummeted 18%. Lawrence Montgomery's net worth evaporated by nearly $400 million in the first hour of trading. Inside the Montgomery family's Upper East Side townhouse, the mood was funereal. The curtains were drawn. Lawyers, an army of them, filled the library. Caleb sat in the corner, nursing a hangover that felt like a skull fracture. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers from the night before, his dress shirt unbuttoned. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash, only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. "You idiot," Lawrence Montgomery hissed, pacing the Persian rug. "You absolute, colossal idiot. You didn't just marry a gold digger, Caleb. You married a corporate raider." "I didn't know," Caleb mumbled, his voice raspy. She was wearing a cardigan, Dad." She drank instant coffee. "She's a Kensington," Lawrence roared, throwing a crystal tumbler against the fireplace. It shattered, scattering glass across the hearth. "Do you know who her grandfather was? Arthur Kensington made his first million by bankrupting his own brother. It's in the blood." The head of their legal team, a shark named Leonard Ross, cleared his throat. "It's worse than the stock price, Lawrence. The DOJ is already sniffing around based on the audio recordings Sienna referenced. Pierce O'Connell has been taken into custody for questioning regarding insider trading. If he flips, and he will, he drags Caleb down with him." "And the marriage?" Lawrence demanded. "Annul it. Fraud. She misrepresented herself." Leonard sighed, removing his glasses. "We can't. Legally, she never lied. She just didn't tell you her maiden name. Caleb never asked. And the bet? That proves he entered the marriage in bad faith. Not her. If we go to court, she gets half of Caleb's assets. And since you transferred 10% of the company voting rights to Caleb last year for tax purposes, she gets half of that too." "She gets a seat on the board?" Caleb whispered, horrified. "She gets a seat," Leonard confirmed. "And she has the capital to buy more." Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, one of the tallest residential towers in the Western Hemisphere, Sienna Kensington was eating a bagel. The drowned rat persona was gone forever. Sienna sat at a marble island, wearing a silk kimono, watching the news on a massive screen. Her team was buzzing around her. Roberts, her head of security and digital forensics, placed a tablet in front of her. "Pierce is talking to the feds. He's singing like a canary to save his license." "Good," Sienna said, taking a bite of her bagel. "What about Tristan?" "Tristan is currently on a private jet to Mykonos. He's fleeing the jurisdiction." Sienna laughed. "Predictable." "And Caleb?" "Caleb has been trying to call you 14 times since midnight." Sienna looked at her phone. It was buzzing again. "Husband calling." She picked it up. "Hello, Caleb," she said, her voice cool. "Sienna?" Caleb's voice was broken. "Please, we need to talk. Not lawyers, just us." "There is no us, Caleb. There never was. There was a bet, and there was a target." "I fell in love with you," Caleb shouted, the desperation cracking through the speaker. "The last month? It wasn't fake for me. I was going to call off the bet. I swear." "You were going to call it off?" Sienna asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that why you had the divorce papers drafted 3 days ago?" "I saw the file on Leonard's server, Caleb. Irreconcilable differences. You were going to serve me tonight." Silence. I was scared," Caleb whispered. "My father pressured me." "You're a 30-year-old man, Caleb. Stop blaming your daddy," Sienna said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I'm filing for divorce today, and I'm taking the house in the Hamptons. I always hated that decor anyway." She hung up. But Sienna made one critical error. She assumed the war was against Caleb and Lawrence. She assumed she had already beaten the Montgomerys because the men were weak, arrogant, and sloppy. She forgot about the woman who had birthed them. The game changed on February 2nd. The press had dubbed the scandal the betrayal of the decade. Sienna was a folk hero to some, the woman who beat the toxic billionaires at their own game, and a villain to others who saw her as a manipulative shrew. Sienna was leaving her office in Midtown when her car was blocked. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled across the exit of the parking garage. Sienna's security detail exited the vehicle instantly, hands on their holsters. "Back up," Roberts shouted. The rear window of the Rolls-Royce rolled down. Sitting there was a woman who looked like a preserved orchid. Beautiful, cold, and utterly terrifying. She wore dark sunglasses and a scarf that cost more than a Honda Civic. It was Victoria Montgomery. Caleb's mother. She had been in exile, self-imposed in Paris for the last 5 years, living off a separate trust fund after a nasty separation from Lawrence. But blood, as they say, is thicker than water, and money is thicker than blood. Mrs. Kensington Montgomery, Victoria called out. Her voice was like crushed velvet. Get in. We need to have a chat. Sienna signaled her guards to stand down. She opened her car door and walked over. She knew who Victoria was. The woman was a legend in the corporate world, not for her business acumen, but for her ruthlessness. Rumor had it, she once poisoned a rival's prize racehorses just to send a message. Sienna leaned into the window. I don't negotiate with terrorists, Victoria. Victoria lowered her sunglasses. Her eyes were ice blue, identical to Caleb's, but devoid of his weakness. My son is an idiot, Victoria said plainly, and my husband is a dinosaur. They deserved to lose to you. Honestly, I admired the play. The Drowned Rat Act? Genius. Thank you, Sienna said, wary. However, Victoria continued, examining her glove, you are threatening the family trust, and that pays for my lifestyle. So, I've returned to clean up the mess. You can't stop the SEC, Sienna said, or the divorce. Oh, I don't care about the SEC. I care about leverage, Victoria smiled. You see, Sienna, you played the perfect victim, but nobody is that perfect. My investigators didn't look at your bank accounts. They looked at your medical records, specifically from your time at the Davos Clinic in Switzerland 8 years ago. Sienna froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. That was the one secret she had buried deep, the one thing that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with her sanity. Severe episodes, Victoria recited from memory. Paranoia, delusions of persecution. A breakdown after your uncle died. I was grieving, Sienna snapped. I was 22. You were committed, Victoria corrected. Involuntarily. For 3 months. Victoria leaned closer. Here is the new narrative, darling. You aren't a avenging angel. You are a mentally unstable woman with a history of delusions who entrapped my son because you developed an obsession with him. The audio tapes? Doctored. The bet? A fabrication of your sick mind. We will paint you as a stalker, Sienna. We will leak the medical files. We will have every doctor on CNN discussing your instability. That's illegal, Sienna hissed. HIPAA violations. I'm a Montgomery, Victoria laughed softly. Laws are for poor people. You of all people should know that. Victoria handed her a manila envelope. Inside is a settlement agreement. You walk away with nothing. You issue a public apology stating you fabricated the allegations against Caleb due to a mental health crisis. You sign over your shares of Montgomery Shipping to me. Do that, and the medical records stay buried. And if I don't? If you don't, Victoria put her sunglasses back on, I will have you declared mentally incompetent and placed under a conservatorship faster than you can say Britney Spears. And guess who will apply to be your conservator? Caleb. The Rolls-Royce window rolled up. The car purred away, leaving Sienna standing in the exhaust fumes, the envelope heavy in her hand. Sienna returned to her penthouse in a daze. She had prepared for a financial fight. She had prepared for a PR fight. She hadn't prepared for a war on her own sanity. She walked into her war room. Roberts was there, looking grim. What did she say? Roberts asked. Sienna threw the envelope on the table. She knows about Davos. Roberts paled. How? That file is sealed by the Swiss government. She bought someone, or she stole it. It doesn't matter. Sienna paced the room, her hands shaking. For the first time since the gala, she felt fear. Real, visceral fear. The breakdown at Davos had been the darkest period of her life. If that became public, the narrative would flip. The strong heiress would become the crazy ex-wife. The board would vote to remove her. The SEC testimony would be discredited as the ramblings of a lunatic. We need to settle, Roberts said quietly. If they release that, your reputation is torched. Not just here, but in London. The Kensington board will force you out. Sienna looked out the window at the skyline. She saw the Montgomery building in the distance. A monolith of black steel, No, Sienna whispered. Sienna, look at the risk, Roberts urged. No. Sienna slammed her hand on the glass. She turned around, her eyes blazing with a new kind of fire. Not the cold calculation of the library, but the desperate, cornered fury of a survivor. She wants to play dirty, Sienna said, grabbing her phone. She thinks she can use my past to break me. She forgot one thing, Roberts. What? I own the bank that holds her trust fund. Sienna dialed a number. Get me the file on Project Medusa, she ordered. And call Caleb. Tell him I want to meet. Alone. Tonight. You're going to meet him? Roberts asked, confused. After what his mother just threatened? I'm not going to meet him to negotiate, Sienna said, pulling a recorder out of her safe. A different one this time. A tiny, high-tech wiretap device. I'm going to turn him. Victoria thinks Caleb is a pawn? Fine. I'm going to make him my pawn. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't look crazy. She looked lethal. She wants a villain, Sienna muttered. I'll show her a villain. The wind off the East River was biting, carrying the scent of salt and gasoline. It was 11 p.m. The location was a deserted pier at the South Street seaport, shadowed by the towering masts of the historic ships docked nearby. Sienna stood near the railing, her coat collar turned up against the chill. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was hunting. Footsteps echoed on the wooden planks. Hesitant, irregular. She didn't turn around. You're late, Caleb. Caleb Montgomery emerged from the shadows. He looked like a ghost of the man who had bet $3 million on a human heart just 4 months ago. His eyes were sunken, his designer stubble had grown into a messy beard, and he reeked of stale scotch. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a suit jacket that hung loosely on his frame. My mother has eyes everywhere, Caleb said, his voice trembling. If she knows I'm here, if she knew you were here, she'd have you committed. Sienna finished for him, finally turning around. The moonlight caught the hard angles of her face. That's her plan, Caleb. You know that, right? Caleb laughed bitterly. No. Her plan is to destroy you, to use your history, to paint you as insane and void the marriage. That is phase 1. Sienna stepped closer, her heels clicking ominously on the wood. But think, Caleb, you're a liability. You're the one who made the bet. You're the one who got caught on tape. You're the one who lost the company. Do you really think Victoria Montgomery, a woman who sold her own sister's wedding ring to fund a startup in the 90s, is going to let you inherit what's left? Caleb went still. She's my mother. She's a shark, Sienna corrected. I saw the draft of the conservatorship petition, Caleb. It doesn't just name me. It names you. She claims your gambling addiction and your reckless romantic decisions prove you are unfit to manage your own finances. She wants to lock us both away in a Swiss clinic while she runs the empire. Caleb slumped against a pylon, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty ground. He put his head in his hands. I have nothing. I lost the money. I lost the reputation. I lost you. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. I really did love you, Sienna, in the end. I know you don't believe me, but when we were watching movies on your couch, that was the only time I felt real. Sienna looked down at him. Her expression softened, just a fraction. It wasn't forgiveness, she was past that, but it was pity. If you want to survive, Caleb, you have to stop being a child, she said coldly. You have to become a killer. She pulled a document from her bag. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a proxy form. Tomorrow morning, there is an emergency board meeting. Your mother is going to present my medical records. She is going to ask the board to remove me. I need you to walk into that room, and I need you to vote. Vote for what? For the nuclear option, Sienna whispered. We are going to burn it all down. The boardroom, 9 a.m. The conference room on the 50th floor of the Montgomery building was a fortress of glass and steel. The air conditioning was set to a sterile 68 degrees. Sitting at the head of the table was Lawrence Montgomery, looking aged and weary. To his right sat Victoria, looking like a queen in exile, dressed in a white Chanel suit that screamed innocence and power. Around the table sat the 12 members of the board, men and women who controlled the fate of thousands of employees. They looked nervous. The doors opened. Sienna walked in. She wasn't wearing the power suit of a corporate raider today. She was wearing a simple black dress, modest and severe. She wore no jewelry. She looked vulnerable, yet composed. Behind her walked Roberts, carrying a single briefcase. "You're late," Victoria said, not bothering to look up from her files. "And you brought your dog. How quaint." "Good morning, Victoria," Sienna said, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table. "Lawrence, let's get this over with," Lawrence grunted. "We have a motion to remove Sienna Montgomery from the board on the grounds of mental incapacity and fraud." "Seconded," Victoria said smoothly. She stood up, holding a manila folder, the same one she had shown Sienna in the car. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, it brings me no pleasure to do this, but we have obtained sealed records from the Davos Clinic in Switzerland. These records prove that the woman sitting across from us has a history of severe delusional episodes, paranoia, and deflay." "I was depressed," Sienna interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Victoria stopped. The room went silent. 8 years ago, Sienna stood up, her hands flat on the table. "My uncle died. He was the only father figure I ever had. He died because this company," she pointed at Lawrence, "destroyed him for sport. I broke down. Yes, I went to a clinic to heal. I am not ashamed of my grief, Victoria, and I am not ashamed of asking for help." She looked around the table, making eye contact with every board member. "But weaponizing a mental health crisis to cover up corporate malfeasance? That isn't just cruel, it's desperate." Victoria laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Nice speech, darling, but this is Wall Street. We don't care about feelings. We care about stability. And a woman who hallucinates is not stable. The vote is called." "Wait," a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Caleb stood there. He was shaved. He was wearing a dark suit. He looked sober, for the first time in years. "Caleb?" Lawrence asked, confused. "You're not on the board anymore. You transferred your voting rights to me." "Actually," Caleb walked into the room. "I checked the bylaws, Dad. The transfer requires a signature from the compliance officer. You never got it. You were too busy hiding assets in the Caymans." Caleb pulled a chair up next to Sienna. He sat down. "I still hold 10% of the voting shares," Caleb said, "and I motion to dismiss the removal proceedings against my wife." You traitor," Victoria hissed, her white suit suddenly looking like a shroud. "I am trying to save you. You're trying to bury me," Caleb said, looking his mother in the eye. "Sienna told me about the conservatorship, Mom. You were going to lock me up right next to her." Victoria's face went pale. The board members began to whisper. "It doesn't matter." Lawrence slammed his hand on the table. "Even with Caleb's 10% and your shares, you don't have a majority. We still control 51% of the voting bloc. You lose, Sienna. Get out of my building." Sienna didn't move. She just smiled. A small, terrifying smile. "Roberts," she said, "open the briefcase." Roberts placed the leather case on the table and clicked the latches open. Inside wasn't a stack of papers. It was a single laptop. Roberts connected it to the room's main projector. The screen flickered to life. It displayed a complex web of bank accounts, wire transfers, and shell companies. "What is this?" Lawrence demanded. "This," Sienna said, "is Project Medusa." She picked up a laser pointer. "You see, Lawrence, when I realized I was marrying into this family, I didn't just investigate Caleb. I investigated the money. All of it. I found the trust fund that pays for Victoria's lifestyle. And I found the capital reserves that keep Montgomery Shipping afloat." She clicked a button. The screen zoomed in on a company called Apex Logistics, based in Cyprus. "Apex Logistics," Sienna explained. "A shell company. It funnels money into the Montgomery Family Trust. But where does Apex get its money?" She clicked again. A manifest appeared. It showed shipments of heavy machinery. "You've been shipping dual-use technology to sanctioned entities in North Korea and Iran," Sienna said. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. "That's a lie," Lawrence screamed, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. "It's not a lie," Caleb said quietly. "I saw the manifests, Dad. Last night, Sienna showed me. These are violations of the Office of Foreign Assets Control. OFAC," Sienna continued, her voice clinical. "Federal crimes. Treason, arguably. And the best part? The bank that processes these transactions is Banque Lumière in Luxembourg." Victoria sneered. "So? Swiss banks never talk." "They do," Sienna said. "When the bank is owned by the Kensington Group." Victoria froze. "I bought the bank, Victoria," Sienna said casually. "Last week, I own the records. I own the wire transfers. And as of this morning, at 8:45 a.m., I have submitted a formal, suspicious activity report to the United States Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Treasury Department." Phones began to buzz around the table. Board members were checking their alerts. "The FBI is in the lobby," one board member whispered, his face gray. "They have a warrant." Lawrence Montgomery collapsed into his chair, clutching his chest. This wasn't a maneuver. This was the end. Sienna stood up. She looked at Victoria. The older woman was trembling, her composure shattered into a million pieces. "You wanted to expose my past?" Sienna asked softly. "I just exposed your future. You're going to prison, Victoria. You both are." Victoria lunged across the table, her nails aimed at Sienna's face. "You bitch! You ruin everything." Security guards Sienna's security intercepted her. They held the screaming matriarch back as the elevators dinged. A team of FBI agents, wearing blue windbreakers with yellow lettering, swarmed the room. "Lawrence Montgomery, Victoria Montgomery," the lead agent barked. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, money laundering, and wire fraud." As the handcuffs clicked onto Lawrence's wrists, he looked at Caleb. "You," Lawrence spat. "You did this. You betrayed your own blood." Caleb didn't look away. "You bet on the wrong horse, Dad." They were dragged out. The board members sat in stunned silence, terrified that they were next. Sienna turned to them. "I suggest you all resign. Immediately. Except you, Mr. Henderson. You're clean. You can stay as interim CEO until we find a replacement." She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. Caleb followed her. 6 months later, the scandal of the century had finally started to fade from the front pages, replaced by the trial. Lawrence and Victoria Montgomery were facing 20 years in federal prison. The plea deals were non-existent. Sienna had ensured the evidence was watertight. Montgomery Shipping had been rebranded as Kensington North. The stock had rebounded, stronger than ever, under ethical leadership. Sienna sat in a cafe in Paris, watching the rain streak the glass. She was alone. She preferred it that way now. The chair opposite her scraped back. It was Caleb. He looked different. He was working a regular job, now a consultant for a logistics firm in Ohio. He drove a Ford. He lived in a rented apartment. He had nothing left of his fortune. The government had seized almost everything, and what was left had gone to legal fees. "I didn't think you'd come," Caleb said. "I have a meeting with the French regulators in an hour," Sienna said, sipping her espresso. "I have 10 minutes." Caleb nodded. He placed a small box on the table. It wasn't a ring, it was a key. "The key to the apartment in Queens," he said. "I kept it. I don't know why. I thought, maybe you'd want it back." Sienna looked at the key. It was a relic of a life that didn't exist. A life where she was Sienna Cole, the librarian, and he was just a guy who spilled coffee on her. "Keep it," she said. "I don't look back, Caleb." "Is there any chance?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "Any chance at all? I helped you. I saved you in that boardroom." "You saved yourself," Sienna corrected, "and that was the first manly thing you've ever done." She stood up, smoothing her trench coat. "We aren't a love story, Caleb. We're a cautionary tale. You made a bet. I collected the winnings. That's the transaction." "I love you," he whispered. "I know," Sienna said, looking down at him with a sad smile. "That was your punishment. You fell in love with the executioner." She turned and walked out into the Parisian rain. She didn't open an umbrella. She just walked, head high, the sound of her heels clicking on the cobblestones like the ticking of a clock that had finally stopped. She was Sienna Kensington. She was worth billions. She was alone, and she was free. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how a $3 million bet destroyed a dynasty. It's a brutal reminder that in the world of high stakes, the person you think is the pawn might actually be the queen. Caleb Montgomery thought he was playing a game, but he learned the hard way that you never bet against a woman who has nothing to lose or a woman who has everything to hide. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and hit subscribe so you don't miss our next story. We have a crazy one coming up next week about a fake prince and a diamond heist you won't believe. Thanks for watching.